Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. In a quiet suburb where nothing ever goes missing, one man's favorite tools start to vanish. First a cracked ratchet, then a prized drill. But when a sticky trap reveals the thief isn't who he expected, a small-town mystery explodes into a full-blown war. Welcome to Maple Ridge. I've lived in Maple Ridge long enough to know the rhythm of the neighborhood, the way sprinklers kick on just before sunrise, the way the air smells like mesquite after someone 2 streets over fires up their smoker, the way my garage feels like a second spine growing out of my house. That garage is my sanctuary. It's where I breathe, where I fix, where I resurrect Detroit steel from the dead. I know every shelf, every drawer, every scratch on the concrete floor. So when something goes missing, I know it instantly, like someone swapped out one of my ribs while I slept. The first thing to vanish was a cracked ratchet I'd owned for over a decade. It wasn't valuable, but it was mine, and it had been hanging on the same hook since the Bush administration. I was elbow deep in restoring a sky blue '69 Camaro for a client when I noticed the empty hook staring at me like a missing tooth. I cursed under my breath, checked the workbench, the floor, even the damn trash can. Nothing. I chalked it up to exhaustion and told myself I'd misplaced it. My wife joked that my tools were going feral and running away. I laughed, but it felt off. That tool hadn't moved in months. A week later, it got stranger. I reached for my cordless drill, my favorite, the one I used almost daily, and came up empty. I remembered tossing it into my rolling cart the previous afternoon. It wasn't there. It wasn't on the charger. It wasn't anywhere. I checked the trunk of my truck, thinking maybe I'd absent-mindedly left it there after fixing the tailgate latch. Nope. That drill was gone, and annoyance started to ferment into suspicion. I didn't say anything out loud, but the thought was already there. Somebody had walked into my garage. I tried to shake it off. Maple Ridge wasn't that kind of place. Sure, we had the usual HOA-induced weirdness, passive-aggressive notes about lawn length, Karen's obsession with uniform mailbox aesthetics, the occasional neighborly meltdown over recycling bins. But theft? No. This was a picturesque little bubble outside Austin where people borrowed cups of sugar and returned them with cookies. Then my $700 Snap-on socket set vanished. That was different. That set was practically sacred to me. I'd bought it with the first paycheck from a big restoration job, and I'd engraved my initials, GJ, by hand on the metal case. Losing that felt like losing a piece of myself. I tore the garage apart. Nothing. By the time the sun dipped low, the suspicion I'd been trying to ignore had grown teeth. That evening, I stepped outside to grab something from my truck and spotted my neighbor, Michael Brooks, standing outside his own garage. He was leaning against his workbench, holding a familiar red metal case. My case. My initials. I froze for half a second, just long enough for my stomach to drop into my boots. I walked over, keeping my tone level. Nice set. Where'd you get it? Michael blinked too fast. That alone told me everything. He was normally steady, calm, ex-military, predictable as a metronome. This time his eyes skittered away from mine. Oh, picked it up at Home Depot, I think. Or maybe the old neighbor left it. Honestly, can't remember. He shifted his grip, almost covering the faint GJ with his thumb. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I just tilted my head and said, "Funny. Looks exactly like the one I've been missing." He forced a laugh, but it sounded like a dying lawnmower. Must be a coincidence. Sure, and I'm the Queen of England. I let it go. For the moment. No yelling, no confrontation. I just stared at him long enough for him to feel the weight of it, then turned and headed back to my place. My pulse was thundering, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. I wasn't dealing with forgetfulness or clumsiness. Someone was taking my things, and Michael had just flashed the biggest red flag I could imagine. Later that night, after my wife went to bed, I walked out to the garage with a flashlight. I checked every door, every window, every hinge. The front camera covered the driveway. The camera near the side gate covered the yard. But the small service door, the one that opened directly into the garage from the backyard, sat in a blind spot. It had a keypad lock I'd installed years ago, and Michael had helped me wire the light above it. That meant he also knew the code. I'd never thought twice about it. Why would I? He used to be a friend. I stood there under the dim light, staring at that door, listening to the quiet hum of the suburban night. The metal handle felt too cold, too smooth. Someone had touched it recently. I could feel it in my bones. I whispered to myself, "Somebody's been in here, and they're probably coming back." That was the moment something clicked. Suspicion turned into certainty, and certainty turned into resolve. Whoever had been using my garage like their personal shopping mall had no idea they were about to step into a very different neighborhood, one where I wasn't going to shrug, smile, and move on. No more missing tools, no more coincidences. If someone wanted to keep stealing from me, I'd make damn sure they left with more than they bargained for. The following evening, the air felt different, sharper, quieter, the kind of quiet that settles right before a storm. I wasn't interested in waiting around for the next tool to disappear, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let Michael or anyone else stroll into my garage like it was a self-serve hardware store. If someone wanted to keep stealing from me, then they were about to walk straight into a trap they'd never forget. I spent most of the afternoon preparing, not pacing, not hesitating, preparing. First thing I did was pick up one of those small tube bottles of industrial gel superglue, the kind that bonds skin so fast surgeons warn you not to blink while using it. I knew exactly where I wanted it. The handle of the sliding drawer where I kept mid-range but appealing tools, expensive enough to tempt a thief, not expensive enough to make me cry if they disappeared for real. I cleaned the handle with alcohol wipes, dried it thoroughly, then squeezed a generous line of glue across the metal. It looked normal, shiny only if you stared too closely. Perfect. Next, I installed a new camera, one so small it looked like a black screwhead. I wedged it into the ventilation grill above the workbench, angled just right to see the entire stretch of drawers. The feed streamed directly to my phone and a cloud backup. No more blind spots, no more privacy for thieves. My wife poked her head into the garage at one point, holding a pair of earrings. "You're awfully focused. Should I be concerned? Is this one of those mechanic rituals I'm not supposed to ask about?" I shrugged. "Just tightening up security. Someone's been messing with my stuff." She leaned against the doorframe, frowning. "You think it's Michael?" "I don't think," I said. "I know, but I'm not saying anything until I have proof. Real proof." She nodded slowly, lips pressed tight, then walked inside and kissed my cheek gently. "Just be careful. Don't start a war with the HOA unless you intend to win." I smirked. "Oh, I intend to." When evening rolled around, I made a point of being visible. I dragged my wife out to dinner, making sure anyone watching, especially from the Brooks house, saw us pull out of the driveway. I even turned on the porch light and left the side gate unlocked, subtle enough not to scream, "Trap!" but obvious to someone who thought they were being clever. We drove to a steakhouse 20 minutes away, and while my wife looked at the menu, I checked the garage camera feed under the table. Nothing. We ordered. Still nothing. Halfway through my drink, a notification buzzed across my screen. Movement detected in Garage Cam 3. My heart gave a single hard thump. I opened the feed. The side door creaked open. A shadow slipped inside. Not Michael, Karen, president of Maple Ridge HOA, working alone, carrying a tote bag. She moved like she'd done this before. Quick, confident, no hesitation. She scanned the shelves with the precision of someone searching for something specific. She muttered under her breath, something about, "He won't notice a damn thing." Then she crouched in front of the tool drawers. My wife glanced at my phone and froze. "Is that?" "Yep." "Are we calling the police?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Let's see what she does." Karen opened her tote bag. Inside were several items, one of my missing screwdrivers, a utility knife, even a flashlight I'd assumed I misplaced. She dug around the drawers, taking whatever she liked. Then her hand landed on the glued handle. She tugged. The camera caught it beautifully. The sudden jerk, the tiny gasp, the way her eyes widened when she realized her hand wasn't coming free. She tried to pull again, harder. Her panic translated into frantic movement, and her other hand shot out to brace against the drawer. Bad decision. Very bad. Both hands stuck instantly. She made a noise halfway between a shriek and a growl. Her tote bag toppled, tools clattering across the floor. The camera picked up every curse she whispered, including a charming, "Michael's gonna kill me if I come home empty-handed." We left the restaurant before dessert. When we pulled into the driveway, the garage lights were still off. I motioned for my wife to stay behind me and open the interior door. What we found looked like a scene from a low-budget hostage movie. Karen sat on the concrete floor, legs splayed, arms stuck to the drawer like she'd tried to wrestle it into submission and lost. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. Her tote bag lay tipped over, spilling stolen goods like a confession. She jerked her head up when she saw me. "Garrett, thank God. I was just, your door was unlocked and..." I raised a hand. "Stop talking. It's embarrassing for both of us." She switched tactics immediately, shrinking her voice to something pitiful. "Look, I was going to return everything. I swear. Michael just needed a few things for a project and..." "Karen," I said, stepping closer, "you've got my drill, my old screwdrivers, and half my missing equipment in that bag. And you're glued to my toolbox like a raccoon caught in molasses. Don't insult me." Her face hardened. "If you call the police, I'll ruin you. I run Maple Ridge. You think you can survive here with me as your enemy?" I crouched down to her level, calm as a surgeon. "Karen, you've already broken into my garage and robbed me. The police are the least of your worries." I called the non-emergency sheriff line and explained I had caught a trespasser who was stuck and unable to leave, but that there was no immediate danger. When the deputy arrived, Karen tried to act like she'd been invited in, tried to claim she was checking the property as HOA president, tried to twist it every possible way. But when the deputy watched the footage on my phone, the last of her excuses died on her tongue. The deputy asked if I wanted to press charges. I watched Karen, sweating, furious, hands still glued, and for a moment, I saw Michael's earlier expression, that cold look when he realized he'd been exposed. Something told me this wasn't just a simple theft. There was more behind this. Something coordinated, something bigger. "Not tonight," I told the deputy. "Just document it. I want the incident on record." Karen's relief was visible. Desperate. It almost made me laugh. We used acetone to free her hands. She hissed the whole time like a cornered animal. Before leaving, I made her gather every item she'd taken tonight and every item she admitted to taking before. She left shaking, clutching her bag like it was a lifeline. When the garage finally went quiet, I locked the door, checked the camera again, and let out a long breath. I had proof now, proof that someone had been robbing me, and proof that they were up to something more than a couple of missing tools. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. The next morning started with the kind of knock that tells you the person on the other side has already decided they are the victim. 3 sharp bangs on the front door, no doorbell, no text, just entitlement in percussion form. My wife looked at me over her coffee and I sighed, set my mug down, and went to answer. Michael stood on the porch, arms folded, jaw clenched, eyes already hot. He looked less like my neighbor and more like a man who had rehearsed a speech in the mirror and could not wait to deliver it. "We need to talk," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "We really do." He pushed past me into the entryway like he still lived here. "What the hell were you thinking, Garrett? Gluing her to your toolbox, calling the sheriff. You humiliated my wife." I closed the door behind him with deliberate calm. "Your wife humiliated herself breaking into my garage and stuffing my tools into her bag. I just supplied gravity and adhesive." His nostrils flared. "You could have come to me, man to man. You did not have to involve law enforcement." "I did come to you," I said. "When my socket set walked over to your garage, you lied to my face." Remember, for a moment his composure slipped, then he snapped it back like a soldier adjusting a uniform. "You do not understand what you started. Karen runs this place. You embarrass her. You embarrass the HOA. That has consequences." There it was. Not an apology. A threat. I stepped closer, just enough for him to feel the change in air. "Here is what I understand, Michael. Your wife was caught on camera committing a crime in my home. I chose not to press charges. I could still change my mind. So maybe you should think very carefully about how you want this conversation to go." We stared at each other for a few seconds. He was the one who broke eye contact first. "You ruined everything," he muttered. "You think people here are going to side with you over her? Good luck." He left without another word. The door shut behind him like a period at the end of a sentence. The consequences showed up a few days later in the mail. The first envelope had the familiar Maple Ridge HOA logo on it. Inside was a violation notice. My garage doors were non-compliant with the approved color palette. That was interesting, considering they had been the same shade of dark gray for years and had passed every previous drive-by inspection Karen ever did. The second letter landed the next day. Apparently, my carport extension over the driveway was now an unauthorized structure and needed to be removed or brought into compliance within 30 days. I pulled up the old email chain where Karen herself had signed off on the design 3 years ago, praising my commitment to property aesthetics. I printed it and pinned it to the fridge as a reminder of how much bullshit people can pack into one life. By the end of the week, I had a third notice: complaints about excessive noise from commercial activity in my garage during late hours. The notice referenced multiple anonymous neighbor reports. Translation: Karen and whoever she could bully into playing along. I did not scream. I did not rant on the neighborhood forum. I gathered paperwork. I dug out my original HOA approval letter for the carport, the paint sample signed with a neat little Maple Ridge stamp, the email where Karen had called my restored Chevelle a neighborhood treasure. I organized them in a folder. Then I checked the noise ordinances for the county and confirmed exactly how late I could legally run an impact wrench without summoning the wrath of the law. Spoiler, later than Karen liked. A few days later, an inspector from the city zoning office called, saying he had received complaints about an unlicensed automotive business being run out of a residential garage. His tone was bored, the tone of a man who had heard every neighborhood feud flavor under the sun. "Come on by," I told him. "I will show you everything. Nothing to hide." He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I walked him through the garage, showed him the limited number of vehicles I worked on, the hours I kept, the fact that I was not running some 24/7 chop shop. Just one guy, a few classic cars, and more coffee than is probably medically advisable. He measured sound levels, checked my permits, and wrote notes on a clipboard. "You are within the county guidelines," he said finally. "HOA rules are their own mess, but as far as the city goes, you are fine. Just keep your bigger jobs during daytime hours, and you should be golden." "Trust me," I said. I like sleeping too much to be grinding metal at midnight. When he left, some of the tension in my shoulders eased, but not much. It was clear now. Karen was not going to let the garage incident go. Instead of being grateful I had not pressed charges, she had decided to use every HOA weapon at her disposal to try to squeeze me. So I called a lawyer. Her name was Sandra, a property attorney recommended by a customer who had once gone 10 rounds with a different HOA. We sat in her office while she read through the stack of letters, approvals, and photos. "Classic overreach," she said, flipping a violation notice like it offended her personally. "They ignored your garage color for years, approved your carport, knew exactly what you did for a living, and now, suddenly, it is all a problem. And you have video of the HOA president committing a crime in your house." "She calls it checking on community safety," I said. Sandra snorted. "Yeah. And I am the tooth fairy. Here is what you do. You write them a formal response, politely but firmly. You attach copies of the original approvals. You demand they cease selective enforcement and harassment. And you let them know, very calmly, that you have evidence of criminal conduct by their president, and you are prepared to bring it forward if this continues." "Blackmail?" I asked. "Leverage," she corrected. "You are not asking them to ignore real violations. You are asking them to stop fabricating them. Big difference." That night, I drafted the letter. My tone was measured, almost polite, but the message was clear. I was done being their punching bag. I reminded them of the approvals, of the inspector's report, of my right to operate within county regulations. And in one short paragraph, I mentioned the documented incident of unauthorized entry and attempted removal of property by the current HOA president, complete with the sheriff's incident report number. I printed it, signed it, scanned it, and emailed it to the official HOA address. Then I went out to the garage, flipped on the lights, and stood there for a long moment, listening to the quiet. The war had started. The difference was, I was not the one pretending it was about paint colors and carports. They wanted to use their rules as a weapon. I was perfectly willing to hit back with something sharper. For a few days after I sent that letter, the neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. People still waved at me out of habit, but their eyes slid away too quickly, like they'd been warned not to linger. Maple Ridge buzzed with the kind of tension you can taste. Thin, metallic, waiting for someone to snap it. It didn't take long before someone did. I was changing the oil on a black 71 Challenger when a guy I barely knew, Trevon, the new homeowner on Oakview Lane, walked up the driveway. He looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot. "Hey, Garrett, can I ask you something weird?" "Try me," I said. He glanced around like he expected Karen to pop out of the bushes. "Did you lose anything from your garage lately?" I laughed once, humorless. "You could say that." He blew out a breath. Good. Or, well, not good, but same thing happened to me. My power tools vanished a month after I moved in. I thought I misplaced them, but then the HOA started hitting me with violations. Stupid ones. Like my grass was an inch too tall. My mailbox was non-compliant. They even told me to repaint my front door. That sounded familiar enough to make the back of my neck tighten. "Let me guess," I said. "It all happened right after you mentioned the missing tools." His silence was answer enough. Later that day, at the hardware store, I ran into Old Man Bill, the guy who always wore the Vietnam vet cap and carried a thermos everywhere. He squinted at me and said, "Heard you had a run-in with the HOA queen." "You could call it that." He leaned closer. "Couple years back, my generator walked off. And next thing you know, Karen's sending me letters about my shed. Real aggressive ones. I didn't make connections back then, but now," he tapped his temple. "Makes you think." It did more than make me think. It connected dots I didn't want to admit were connected. That night, I sat in my garage with a notebook and started building a timeline. Names, dates, items stolen, when the violations began, who moved away afterward. A pattern emerged. Ugly, repetitive, almost mechanical. Someone's stuff disappeared. They complained. HOA pressure followed. The homeowner broke or left, and magically, the neighborhood stayed orderly under Karen's iron grip. The hell of it was. I almost respected the efficiency. Almost. Wanting something more concrete, I went digging through public sheriff's logs. Nothing detailed, but enough to show a spike in unresolved petty theft reports around Maple Ridge. Always small-scale tools, equipment, garden machines. Nothing worth a city detective's time, but exactly the kind of things you could resell quietly for cash. And then I saw something on Saturday morning that made my blood run cold. The HOA was hosting a neighborhood-wide garage sale event, with Karen front and center directing tables and banners. Curious, I walked by casually, coffee in hand, playing the calm neighbor. And there they were. Tools. Boxy. Familiar. Scratched in just the right places. A gardening trimmer I'd swear belonged to a woman who moved out 2 years ago. A set of wrenches I'd seen on Bill's workbench before his generator incident. And on one table, half covered under a tarp, a bright yellow impact driver I'd owned before the one that vanished last spring. I took out my phone and snapped photos quietly. Names, serial numbers, distinctive marks, every piece recorded. Karen caught my eye from across the street, her smile tight and plastic. She raised a hand in a fake friendly wave, and for the first time, I waved back. Not kindly, strategically, because now I knew this wasn't some neighborly misunderstanding or a one-time theft. There was a scheme here, organized, practiced, and so woven into Maple Ridge that half the residents didn't even realize they were being played, but I realized it, and that meant I could finally do something about it. Once I realized Karen and Michael weren't amateurs but repeat offenders, something in me clicked into a different gear. I wasn't just defending my garage anymore. I was tracking a pattern, a system, and systems have weak spots. I bought a drone the next morning, lightweight, quiet, with a decent camera, perfectly legal as long as I kept it above my property line and didn't act like a spy plane. Conveniently, my property line bordered half the neighborhood, which meant the drone's field of view captured a whole lot of coincidences. The first thing I saw surprised even me. Late that night, around the time most of Maple Ridge was asleep, Michael slipped out of his house carrying a bulky case. He looked around, then walked directly to the side of his garage, where he stashed the case under the awning. It wasn't mine this time, but it had the same look. Older tools, scuffed, lived in. Not the kind of thing you buy new, the kind of thing you find. I recorded everything. The next night, the drone caught something else. A pickup truck pulled into their driveway, headlights off. A man hopped out, handed Michael a box, took a different box in return, and drove off like they were exchanging contraband. If I didn't know better, I'd say it looked like a miniature pawn shop operation disguised as neighborly friendliness. Then came the big break. Karen posted on the HOA forum about an upcoming open house at her place. She wanted to demonstrate the Maple Ridge lifestyle to potential buyers. I signed up to attend under a fake name. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. I just walked through the house with a polite smile and my phone set to silent camera mode. Halfway through the tour, I slipped downstairs into the basement. It was staged nicely. Laundry area, storage shelves, a couple of boxes stacked neatly, And right there, sitting on a lower shelf as if it were nothing more than a lawn chair, was my welding machine, the same one that disappeared last year. Yellow casing, faded sticker on the side, and a long, ugly scratch shaped like a crooked letter G. My mark. I snapped close-up photos, then wide shots that showed room context. No mistaking it, Karen had stolen property sitting in her basement, displayed like a family heirloom. I walked back upstairs, blending in with the crowd, while Karen smiled and complimented visitors on their cute shoes and property potential. If she knew what I had just documented, she would have choked on her own lipstick fumes. When I got home, I printed the photos. Then I went online and dug through local selling apps, OfferUp, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist. Within an hour, I found a listing for a gently used Snap-on drill set. The pictures were blurry, but one showed a tiny engraving on the metal. My engraving. GJ. I messaged the seller from a burner account. When they replied, I nearly laughed out loud. The contact number belonged to Michael. By then, I had a full gallery. Photos from the drone, screenshots of listings, images of stolen items displayed openly in Karen's basement. But I wanted more. Something current. Something impossible for them to wiggle out of. So I arranged one more experiment. A controlled one. I left an empty tool case in plain sight on a workbench near the garage door, set up cameras, and kept the drone ready. It didn't take 24 hours before the drone captured Michael approaching that exact spot, glancing around and lifting the empty case like it was gold. He didn't even bother checking if it weighed anything. I followed the GPS tracker I'd tucked inside. It pinged right where I expected, the Brooks garage. Then later that night, the signal moved again, this time toward a small resale shop across town. I didn't need to follow him in person. I had timestamps, locations, and video, enough to tie every step of the process together. By the end of the week, my folder of evidence was thicker than a shop manual. I stared at it, feeling something cold settle in my chest. They weren't petty thieves. They weren't desperate. They were systematic, confident, comfortable. But for the first time, they were also exposed. And now I had exactly what I needed to bring the hammer down. By the time I finished organizing the evidence, my garage looked less like a workshop and more like the war room of someone who'd finally run out of patience. Photos pinned to magnetic boards. Printouts spread across the hood of a stripped-down Impala. A whiteboard covered in dates, arrows, screenshots, serial numbers. If someone walked in cold, they'd think I was tracking a serial killer with a fetish for cordless drills. I booked an appointment with the Travis County Sheriff's Office and walked in carrying a folder thick enough to bruise someone. The detective assigned to property crimes, Detective Hayes, was a tall, tired-looking guy with the permanent expression of someone who has heard every ridiculous neighborhood complaint in existence. He skimmed the first few photos, unimpressed, but when he hit the image of Karen glued to my tool drawer with her tote bag of stolen items beside her, his eyebrows actually lifted. "Is she really the HOA president?" he asked. Unfortunately, he flipped through more pages. Drone captures, marketplace listings, screenshots of Michael's messages, cross-referenced serial numbers, photos of my welding machine sitting pretty in their basement like it paid rent. Hayes let out a quiet whistle. This isn't petty theft anymore. This is a pattern, organized, repeated, probably profitable. Exactly why I'm here, I said, and I want this handled properly. Not brushed off as a neighbor dispute. He nodded and adjusted his glasses. We'll need controlled evidence, fresh, something that ties them to a theft in real time. You willing to cooperate? I didn't even blink. Tell me what you need. Turns out what he needed was marked property. He handed me several invisible UV markers and explained the process like I was prepping for a sting operation, which, to be fair, I was. I bought several items similar to what they like to steal. A mid-priced drill, a set of wrenches, a compact air pump. I spent a night in the garage marking every inch of them with UV microdots and tiny initials. Then Hayes helped me conceal a couple of GPS tags inside the cases. I placed everything exactly where a thief would expect it. Slightly visible, slightly tempting, positioned like bait on a hook. Then I made myself look unavailable. I talked loudly on the phone outside about a trip to Houston, made sure the side of the garage looked lightly unattended, even moved my truck to the street to make it seem like I was gone for the night. Meanwhile, Hayes sat in an unmarked car nearby, ready to pick up the signal from the trackers. It didn't take long. Not even a full day passed before the side garage door eased open on camera. Michael slipped inside like he was clocking into a job. He headed straight for the marked case, checked over his shoulder, and grabbed it. No hesitation, no pause. Smooth, as someone doing something they'd done 100 times. My phone vibrated with the GPS alert 2 minutes later. Hayes sent a text. "We have movement." The signal tracked the case to Michael's garage. He left it there for an hour, then loaded it into his truck and drove off. The tracker pinged at a pawn shop on the east side, one Hayes already suspected was part of the Brooks little ecosystem. What Michael didn't know was that the pawn shop had already been contacted by the sheriff's office and instructed not to resell or discard anything he brought in. When he handed over the case, the employee scanned it with UV and saw the invisible markings glowing like a confession in neon. Hayes texted again. "We have possession." Chain of custody established. Just like that, we had a full traceable theft cycle. My garage, Brooks's property, resale attempt, seizure. Hayes called me the next morning. "This is enough to move forward, enough for warrants, enough to bring the DA on board." "Good," I said, "because they've been doing this for years." He didn't argue. "Yeah, that's what it looks like." That afternoon, I sat alone in my garage for a while, looking at the spot where the bait case had been. The walls felt heavier, like they knew what was about to happen. This wasn't neighborhood drama anymore. This was criminal, and Karen and Michael were about to find out what it felt like to get caught without any glue on their hands to blame it on. The morning the warrants dropped, Maple Ridge woke up to more flashing lights than a Christmas parade. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the first sheriff's SUV rolled past my window. A second one followed, then a third. My wife looked up from her mug with raised eyebrows. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The convoy stopped directly in front of the Brooks house. Within seconds, deputies stepped out, some in uniform, some in plain clothes with vests marked sheriff. They moved with the kind of coordinated precision that tells you this wasn't a courtesy call. This was a takedown. I walked out onto my porch, coffee in hand, doing my best impression of concerned but innocent neighbor. Across the street, people peeked through blinds. Others stepped outside pretending they were just checking their mail. Maple Ridge had never been this quiet. Then the front door of the Brooks house swung open. Michael came out first, shirt half tucked, face twisted with the realization that the world was no longer operating on his rules. He barely had time to open his mouth before a deputy told him to turn around and put his hands behind his back. They cuffed him on the front lawn while Karen shrieked from the doorway. She stumbled outside next, hair a mess still in her robe, yelling about abuse of authority, misunderstanding, neighbor vendettas. She even pointed directly at me and screamed, "He set us up! This is his fault." One of the deputies calmly informed her there was a warrant for her arrest too. She froze, mid-rant, just stopped, then tried to slam the door shut, but 3 deputies were already inside executing the search warrant. A moment later, she was escorted down the porch steps, wrists bound, still sputtering excuses no one cared to hear. For a moment, the whole neighborhood stood there like an audience at a play, unsure whether to clap or gasp. Someone dropped their gardening gloves. Someone else muttered, "I knew it." The HOA treasurer, Mrs. Caldwell, looked like she might faint. The search lasted hours. From my porch, I watched deputies haul out box after box from the Brooks garage. Power tools, extension cords, shop equipment, garden machines, cases of drills, saws, compressors, branded storage bins, items wrapped hastily in towels, others shoved into cardboard boxes. Some still had owners' initials carved into them. Then came the real shocker, 2 storage unit keys found in their house. By noon, investigators had cracked open those units across town and uncovered even more stolen goods. If the Brooks were running a side hustle, it wasn't small time. It was practically a warehouse. When the deputies finally finished, Detective Hayes crossed the street to me. He looked tired, but satisfied. "You were right," he said. "This wasn't petty theft. This was organized." I nodded once, and Karen used her HOA position to cover it. "Oh yeah," he said. "We found notes, lists, notebooks with addresses, item descriptions, even estimated resale values. She wasn't just complicit, she was managing inventory." Inventory. That word made something cold curl under my ribs. The news hit local media within hours. Every channel wanted a piece of HOA president arrested in neighborhood theft ring. They played clips of squad cars, grainy drone shots of the Brooks driveway, interviews with residents who suddenly remembered every strange thing they'd ever seen. I stayed off camera except when a reporter caught a glimpse of me standing next to Detective Hayes while he explained the stolen goods recovery process. I didn't speak, didn't pose, didn't smile. I wasn't in this for the spotlight. But Maple Ridge noticed. That afternoon, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. Well, what was left of it? Half the officers didn't show up, probably too busy burning any questionable paperwork before the sheriff knocked on their doors. The remaining board members looked like they'd edged 20 years in 2 hours. They issued a statement distancing themselves from Karen and Michael, swearing they had no knowledge of misconduct and promising a full audit of all HOA operations. Sure, and maybe unicorns would start mowing lawns for free. I didn't go home afterward. I walked the neighborhood instead. People came up to me quietly, some embarrassed, some relieved, some apologizing for not speaking earlier. I didn't blame them. Karen had ruled this place with fear disguised as community standards. Fear that was gone now. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I sat in my garage, letting the silence settle in. For the first time in a long time, the space felt like mine again. Not a hunting ground for thieves or a battleground for HOA nonsense. Just a garage. My garage. But the fight wasn't over. The criminal part was moving through the system now. But the civil side, the compensation, the accountability, the cleanup, was only beginning. And I intended to finish what I started. The week after the arrest felt like someone had pulled the curtain off Maple Ridge and revealed the backstage mess no one wanted to admit existed. Patrol cars cruised through more often. Neighbors whispered in clumps at the corners of driveways. The HOA website went temporarily offline, which was corporate speak, for we're shredding everything with Karen's name on it. I wasn't celebrating yet, not until the legal dust settled. It didn't take long. About a month after the raid, I got a call from the district attorney's office asking if I'd testify. Not as a victim of petty theft. No, this time I was a witness in a case involving multiple counts of burglary, possession of stolen property, and something they called organized criminal activity, facilitated through misuse of HOA authority. Hearing. That phrase out loud almost made me laugh. Almost. The courthouse was packed the day Karen and Michael were brought in. Reporters lined the steps. Residents hovered in knots. I walked inside, straight-backed, calm, nodding at the people who nodded first, which was everyone now. Funny how losing their tyrant suddenly made them rediscover friendliness. The prosecution laid everything out methodically. Stolen tools tied directly to listings posted by Michael, GPS logs from the tracker operation, video of Karen glued to my drawer while trying to lie her way out, the notebooks from their house, detailing inventory and statements from former residents who'd moved out under pressure. The more the evidence piled up, the more Karen's posture wilted. She didn't look like the HOA queen anymore. She looked like someone who'd finally realized she wasn't untouchable. When I took the stand, I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't need to. I explained the missing tools, the discovery of my socket set in Michael's hands, the glue trap, the drone footage, the marked equipment, the GPS tracker. Facts spoke for themselves. The jury listened like they were watching a slow-motion car crash. Michael's lawyer tried to blame stress, finances, even suggested I'd provoked him. Good effort, terrible aim. The prosecutor shut that down in seconds with UV-marked evidence and pawn shop logs. And then came Karen's attorney, a wiry man with a talent for pretending garbage was gold. He claimed she was trying to protect community standards, that she'd entered my garage out of safety concerns, and that gluing herself to my drawer was an accident during a routine check. The courtroom erupted in quiet laughter. Even the judge rubbed his temples. The verdict wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. Karen was found guilty on multiple felony counts. The judge, in a tone dry as desert heat, sentenced her to a long stretch in state prison, 8 to 10 years depending on parole. Michael got 4 to 5. Watching them led away was like watching a storm finally drift off the horizon. The civil suits came next. My lawyer, Sandra, handled them like a surgeon. HOA liability for negligent oversight, personal damages for property loss, compensation for business interruption due to harassment. By the time the dust fully settled, I had a settlement package worth more than $120,000 and a written apology that probably burned holes in the board's hands as they signed it. The HOA underwent emergency restructuring, which meant the entire board was dissolved and replaced with a temporary management company. The new manager, a calm woman with glasses and zero tolerance for bullshit, called me personally to assure that Maple Ridge would never again be run like a dictatorship with garden clippers. My garage finally felt peaceful again. I registered my restoration work as a formal home-based business, got my permits in order, and installed a new reinforced door system that not even a tank could politely nudge open. Business boomed, not because people pitied me, but because half the county had watched the story unfold on the news and now trusted me with their cars. One quiet evening, I installed a small metal sign on my garage door. Nothing fancy, no neon lights, just a clean plate with black lettering. "Don't steal. You might get stuck again." My wife laughed so hard she had to sit down. A few days later, the new HOA president walked by. An older man, polite, the exact opposite of Karen. He stopped, read the sign, and chuckled. "I think that's the most effective crime deterrent we've ever had in this neighborhood." Maybe he was right, because Maple Ridge settled into something it hadn't felt like in years. Calm, not fake calm, real calm. No more fear of surprise violations. No more power plays disguised as community safety. No more tools disappearing in the night. The Brooks house eventually sold. The new family waved at me on moving day. I waved back. And as I stood there looking at my garage, the place where all hell started and all hell ended, I realized something simple. They tried to run a whole operation in our neighborhood. They thought no one would ever stop them. All it took was one mechanic, a camera, and a tube of super glue.